Welcome everyone to the November meeting of the Calgary Police Commission. I would like to ask at this time that everybody ensure their microphones are muted until they need to speak. I'm Sean Cornett, and I've been the interim chair of the Calgary Police Commission for the past month. However, immediately before this public meeting, the commissioner held our annual organizational meeting and selected a replacement for former chair Benita Croft. I am honored to announce that my colleagues have entrusted me with the responsibility of being the new chair of the commission. It is a responsibility that I take very seriously, and I'm grateful to my colleagues for giving me the opportunity to serve Calgarians in this way. On behalf of the entire police commission, I would like to thank Benita for the hard work and leadership she provided during her time on commission and her time as chair. Her strong commitment to the good governance has left a legacy of which she can be proud. Leading the commission is a very demanding volunteer role, and it requires significant sacrifice and dedication to balance the role with other personal and professional demands. We deeply appreciate the contributions Benita made and know she will continue to show a strong commitment to our community in wherever life takes her. This coming year is going to be another heavy one, as we continue the important work around police reform, ending systemic racism, and ensuring members of the Calgary Police Service have the resources and support they need to keep our community safe. As chair, I am committed to this work and know my colleagues around the table are as well. To open our meeting, I would like to acknowledge that this call is taking place on the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi, made up of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Arhe Nakota First Nations, comprised of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. These are the people who made a treaty with the Crown, forming Treaty 7 territory. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. We are committed to doing our part to address the inequity and intergenerational trauma caused by past and current wrongs, and to support reconciliation with all Indigenous people in our community. The Calgary Police Commission also condemns racism and prejudice in all forms and is committed to being anti-racist. We stand in solidarity with our colleagues, families, and citizens who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of color. Now let me explain the format of this meeting. Please note that the public session of the meeting is being recorded and will be posted on our website so we can make it available to those unable to attend. There will be several presentations made during this meeting from the Calgary Police Service, commission members, and commission staff. Commissioners will then have the chance to ask questions or make comments by raising their hands in Zoom. Joining us as attendees in viewing mode, we have members of the public and media. Once we've completed the presentations, we will move to the public participation section. Anyone who is registered to speak will then have an opportunity to do so. I will call each speaker by name, and you'll have 3 minutes to comment on any agenda items. You'll be asked to unmute when it is your turn to speak. Our current procedures, unfortunately, do not allow either commissioners or the Calgary Police Service to respond to questions or comments during the meeting. We recognize that this is not an effective way to engage with our community, and we are working on changes for early 2022 that will correct this problem and allow for more meaningful dialogue. Following the public participation portion, we will close the public portion of the meeting and ask just the media in chief to remain online with me for a brief media availability. I will now call for declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest. Hearing and seeing no objections, I will now ask for approval of the consent agenda. Hearing no objections to the consent agenda, I will declare it approved as presented. For the chair's report, I would like to welcome Councillor Courtney Walcott to our commission and welcome Councillor Giancarlo Carra back following the election in October. I know you're both passionate about the future direction of policing and how it can be reimagined. We are happy to have your voices at the table and look forward to your contributions. I would also like to thank returning commissioners to the commission. While these are volunteer roles, they require time, energy, and commitment. Your experience will be welcome and valuable as we undertake the important work that is needed in this coming year. I am also pleased to report that the Commission's budget recommendation to Council was approved, resulting in 38 additional positions being added to the service this year. These positions are in addition to the 60 positions that were approved previously. We heard loud and clear in the last employee engagement survey that the city's growth and increasing demands for thoughtful reforms are putting pressure on the sworn and civilian members of the service. And we hope these additional resources will help alleviate some of this pressure. I would also like to take a moment to thank the service for their hard work this past month, as we've seen 5 more homicides since our last commission meeting, another hate crime investigation that resulted in charges, substantive prevention efforts aimed at pharmacy robberies and domestic violence, and a tragic string of traffic collisions this past week, resulting in several stories of life-altering and life-threatening injuries, as well as the death of a father and daughter. The way your members have balanced this heavy workload and successfully brought charges in many of these cases truly speaks to the professionalism of the people. And we want to thank you on behalf of Calgarians. Finally, as a quick update to the Commission, we are still awaiting the announcement of our 2 new volunteer commissioners. 2 people have been nominated and have completed their security screening, but not in time to be here today. We expect their names will be announced in the near future. That concludes my report to the Commission. And so I'd now like to turn it over to the Calgary Police Service to begin items in section 5. The first presentation by the Calgary Police Service will be on the School Resource Officer Review. Please go ahead. I'm not sure who's going to take the lead on this one, but I'm looking for.
Chair, it's Executive Officer Joe Brewer. In the meeting last week with Acting Chair Siddiqui and Edie Spicer, we had discussed going through 5.2 to 5.4 first with questions, and then coming back to 5.1 to allow us ample time to discuss that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I will turn it over to you. And I think it was 5.2, I believe, was the pandemic update. Yes. Please go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Chair Cornett. And I just wanted to, before we go ahead there, I just want to say thanks as well to acknowledge the work of Chair Crofter and her tenure on the commission. We, like you, have appreciated her commitment and leadership on the Calgary Police Commission and her concern about policing here in Calgary. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Want to congratulate you as well for being elected chair by your colleagues. We look forward to working with you, and also to welcome Councillor Walcott to the commission as well. Also look forward to working with you, Councillor. Back to the agenda there, I will flip it over to, there will be a piece from Deputy Chief Topic and Deputy Chief Gill just in relation to 5.2 and pandemic update, and I'll start with Deputy Gill.
Actually,
sure.
Thanks, Chief. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll provide the update from our policy perspective, and then Deputy Topic will provide the update from an operational perspective. So the Calgary Police Service continues to monitor our vaccination policy and has seen high compliance in vaccination rates. Currently, we have 92% of our total membership is fully vaccinated and 1% is partially vaccinated. So for a total of around 93% fully vaccinated. The remainder of the other employees, actually all of the other unvaccinated employees, have opted for the rapid testing program. Our Human Resources and Health Services divisions are working with the commanders, supervisors to ensure rapid testing compliance is maintained, in addition to directly answering employee questions on the COVID-19 policy, rapid testing FAQs, collecting and updating data and status, and conducting any sort of compliance measures we need to for the rapid testing program. Or to Deputy Todd.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chief. With respect to the operations and investigative side of the COVID response, our major event and emergency management section continues to manage the deployment of resources and creation of operational plans pertaining to ongoing demonstrations that pertain to COVID, the vaccinations, etc. Typically, we're seeing every Saturday and a few others per week as fairly regular protests in that regard. Since the last update to the commission in October, we did also receive information about a potential Jam the Airports demonstration, which we worked very closely with the Calgary Airport Authority to address and prevent any disruption to air traffic and passengers. As a result of that protest, one male was arrested for mischief, and there were 17 traffic offenses issued to a number of individuals there. The CPS subsequently received a letter of thanks from the president of the Calgary Airport Authority for the planning, collaboration, and support provided. As well, we continue with our participation at the provincial level as part of the Alberta Enforcement Framework for Repeat Offenders operational group. We prioritize the files occurring across the province, and that involves working with our partners with AHS, Alberta Labor, Prosecution Services, AGLC, etc. Arising out of that work, we have received approximately 56 fraudulent vaccine document complaints that have been followed up by our IMT investigative team. Some of those alleged fraudulent documents are from out of country, so they take some verification to address to determine validity. Currently, the constables assigned to the IMT investigations are working on 16 active fraudulent vaccine document investigations. As well, our investigations chief within the COVID IMT continuously provides intel to the other areas of the service on high profile locations that we need to work with AHS on. Lastly, we are connected to the Public Health Agency of Canada with respect to any changes in travel restrictions, given the emergence of new variants. We participated as recent as yesterday on a national conference call to obtain updates relevant to our jurisdiction, given the status of our airport. So I'll leave it there, understanding we have a big agenda.
Okay, and just to confirm, were we going to leave questions on these ones until the end, or take them?
I think if we can, if there are a few questions, we can ask them as we go through. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to come back all the way once we get into the final conversation.
Okay,
Commissioner,
sounds good.
are there questions that you have for the service? Questions? All right. And if there are ones that arise later, we can go back to those. But for now, there don't seem to be any significant questions. I had one quick one on the pandemic. Do you have, how long will the rapid testing option be in place, or is that a permanent option in your policy? I can't remember. I apologize. I can't remember what it was.
Chair, that will be the option for the foreseeable future while we're through the pandemic, and we'll make decisions in 2020 as and when required based on how the pandemic is going. At this stage, we are well into 2021. We've opted to go till the end of March, but we anticipate that to continue, and again, depending on on how the pandemic unfolds.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oops, go ahead.
I was just going to say, while the policy in effect, that rapid testing option will continue to be in effect as well.
Okay. Councillor Carra.
Thank you very much. So are we assuming that 93% is going to be where we top off in terms of vaccination? And are we do we have any other plans to incent or compel participation in vaccination by the recalcitrant 8 to 7%?
Councillor, for your question, at this stage, we've allowed the option within our policy for the members to either vaccinate or comply with the rapid testing option, which is twice a week, every week with a minimum of 72 hours between tests. And that's within our policy. So the members have opted to go whichever route they have chosen. So 93 have chosen the vaccination route, and the remaining 7% have chosen the rapid testing route. And as long as they continue to apply with policy, we will not compel anyone to take the vaccination who chooses not to. However, we will actively monitor the rapid testing to make sure that the members are complying with our policy. We continue to have conversations with our members and through their commanders and their supervisors. And we'll always encourage vaccination to help protect all of our employees and the clients we deal with. But the rapid testing option is something that both the City of Calgary and the Calgary Police Service have elected to allow within our policy, and then the employees have the choice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my only other question is that City of Calgary employees are paying for the rapid testing out of pocket. Is that the same for members of the service to encourage compliance or to encourage vaccination as the ultimate goal?
Councillor, at this stage, we're in alignment with the City of Calgary. So for the month of November, we were able to secure 125,000 kits from Alberta Health Services that were shared across the corporation, including the Calgary Police Service. So we have been paying for the testing. Our current policy does say that effective December 1st, the members will be responsible for the costs of the rapid test kits.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So can we move on to item 5.3, the Anti-Racism Action Plan update?
Okay, thank you, Chair. And for that, I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Chief McClellan.
Great, thank you, Chief. Good afternoon, Commission. Congratulations, Chair, and welcome, Councillor Walcott. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this update on their monthly anti-racism. First, we want to take this time to acknowledge the passing of CPS external ARAC member, Dr. Darren Lund. Dr. Lund was well respected by the CPS for his commitments to our ARAC. We have engaged the family and a regimental sergeant major will ensure that the proper decorum is afforded during his celebration of life. While not related to anti-racism, I am saddened to announce that one of our long-term VAST volunteers, Mrs. Amina Galani, passed away from a terminal respiratory illness. Mrs. Galani was a volunteer with the CPS for the last 15 years and had given some 8,500 hours of volunteer service to the organization. Her loss was felt across the organization. As an update, these are the steps that we are taking to support anti-racism and diversity. We are working with our Gender and Sexual Diversity Board to consult on content that will inform our education, training, and awareness about the LGBTQ2+ community. We are also working with the Art of the Nudge to partner with the learning development curriculum designers to ensure all future courses incorporate EDI principles. We are in the process of developing our anti-racism curriculum. We are working with our partners with city administration to ensure that the curriculum is relatable and relevant to law enforcement. The internal ARAC speaker series continue to be well received by the committee. To date, we have delivered 7 presentations, with our latest being last week, which was a discussion on promising practices research around anti-racism and EDI. On November 18th, the Diversity Resources team hosted its first Diversity Information Summit. The event was hosted online and had between 90 and 112 attendees logged in at any given time throughout the day. The agenda included subject matter experts presenting on hate and extremism, integrated child exploitation unit, our anti-racism action committee, our criminal intelligence unit, major events and management section, and other presentations also included Tad Millmine's Bullying Ends Here. In addition, on November 23rd, we hosted a half-day workshop for members of our internal ARAC. The theme of the workshop was unconscious bias. And on December 6th, we are hosting a half-day planning session with all of our advisory boards. We are also working closely with one of our post-secondary institutions who are assisting us in creating and building a brand new external website. Our CSIP partnerships saw investments into 27 projects, which we are and will continue to be committed in strengthening existing crisis response initiatives and working with our city partners for transformation. Moving forward into the new year, we are discussing and identifying our strategic plan and all of our action items. With respect to our Indigenous roadmap and Indigenous liaison officers, we continue to meet and have many conversations with many great partners in relation to our Indigenous roadmap. We have assigned a curriculum designer to work with our Indigenous diversity team to create and implement an Indigenous training strategy and we are in the process of hiring a project manager to assist with this work. Our diversity resource team has strategized on the best way to fulfill community expectations, and we are in the process of rebranding this portfolio. Ideas that have been explored include the establishment of a permanent sustainable Indigenous relations office, an Indigenous members circle, an elders consultative council, and an exchange program with tribal police services. On Monday, November 15th, we're proud to raise the flag of the Métis Nation in front of our police headquarters to help launch Métis Week in our city. Every year, we raise the Métis flag to honor members of the nation and to show our continued support in collaboration with the Métis Nation. We previously reported that we were in the midst of community consultation with a view to enhance our Connect app. This is a tool on our smartphones for frontline officers to reference when referring community members to resources and community care providers unique to their specific needs. As a result of these consultations, 30 new resources have been added, 10 of which are dedicated specifically for those from the Indigenous community. And on November 18th, I, along with some of my colleagues, were honored to attend a smudge bow ceremony for one of our constables. The Aboriginal Friendship Centre was kind enough to honor this constable and all of his great work that he has been doing. As a side note, this member shared his journey with adversity. In school, he struggled, and as a result of building a relationship with an SRO, he joined the Calgary Police Service and has been with us for 11 years. Finally, on November 30th, members from District 6 and our diversity team partnered with the Calgary Police Youth Foundation to deliver Operation Happy Feet. Specifically, this included shopping with 20 young people from the South Sudanese community. Youths were recognized for their contributions to the community by receiving a $150 gift card to spend on whatever they wanted. The event was a success and received favorable feedback on social media. Having said all of this, we remain dedicated to all of our commitments we have made in this past year, and we look forward to further engagement with all community partners to ensure our members continue to serve the community the way that they do, day in and day out, keeping all of us safe. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. So I'll ask commissioners if you have questions you'd like to ask. Commissioner Campbell.
Thanks very much, Chair Cornett. Likely for Deputy Chief McClellan, but I'll go directly to Chief Neufeld at first. In a report released this week by the BC Human Rights Commission, which reviewed and analyzed data from 5 police services across British Columbia, the report found, quote, profound racial disparities and is calling for changes to address discrimination in policing, end quote. The report didn't dig into the root causes of the racial disparities. The report did, however, outline 3 main explanations for the results. The first being bias in policing practices, such as surveillance and street checks. Second, police discretion in how minor offenses are handled. And third, bias when civilians report crimes to police. So assuming that we have the intentionality and capacity, would you welcome a review of the police services in Alberta, including, of course, Calgary Police Service, conducted with a similar scope by the Alberta Human Rights Commission?
I think the short answer to that is yes. I would be interested in seeing the report. I've not seen the report at BC. Got it. And also obviously would like to look at the methodologies and that sort of thing, but generally speaking, for sure.
Thank you. My second question also has to do with this report. And again, I apologize that you haven't had the opportunity to review the report. The same report acknowledged that the RCMP had been developing a national approach to the collection, analysis, and reporting of race-based data in policing since July 2020, in collaboration with the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs, of which you are the chair, and Statistics Canada. We know here in Calgary that process has been horrifically slow, but critically important And Calgary Police Service has had their thumb on the top of that process because it is so important to what we're doing. The report also indicated that BC RCMP had, quote, changed its policies on street checks last year in response to concerns that people of color were overrepresented in the stops, and that the new policy had significantly reduced the number of street checks that occur, end quote. Using Calgary's InfoPost data posted on the accountability section of the website, would you please explain whether people of color are overrepresented in InfoPosts or street checks in Calgary?
So sorry, just a couple of clarifications. So I'm not actually the chair of the Canadian.
Pardon me?
No problem. It's the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police, though I do sit on the board there. But that's
I was
just
promoting you in advance. I'm sorry, Chief.
no problem. And so, yeah, so as you know, the Calgary Police Service has been actively engaged with the CACP. It's actually, the RCMP has also the same way that Calgary has, working through the CACP. The CACP has a committee called POLIS, and that committee works with StatsCan, and that's where the work on race-based data is taking place. And yet it is a more complicated change, I think. And you're right, I think it has been progressing slowly, but it is quite a complicated change when you start thinking about the number of systems that need to be changed, and then also the way in which the data is going to be collected, and then the way in which you engage with communities ahead of time to make sure that they get to speak into the way that that's done, and also understand how it's going to be used after. Because I know you're well aware that in the past it's been used in ways that probably unintentionally have stigmatized certain communities. And so there is some work along that's being done, and it is taking a little bit of time. As you also know, I think in Calgary here, we have decided not to go as slow as all of that. We've done some internal consultations here with our diversity advisory boards and such. And so with respect to things like professional standards, complaints, info posts, which you've referenced, that type of information is available. Now, we recognize that we do want to be in line with the broader effort so that once those protocols are put in place, the way in which we collect data and the data ultimately collected will be able to be compared across systems, because if everybody's doing it differently, that's not going to be very useful. So I do appreciate your pain with respect to the speed at which that's unfolding, but it is for good and valid reason around why Canada is a big country, and with all of the provinces, making sure that data can be compared after, I think, is a really, really important piece. To your question about our reporting with respect to info posts on the accountability website, I don't have the exact numbers right now. As you know, the majority of people stopped, though, would be white people. But I do think there is an overrepresentation in there as well of certain folks. Now, as you know, the street checks are done for a variety of reasons. And so I don't know that we would expect, once again, and I think the Human Rights Commission in Ontario spoke about this for sure. I'm not sure about the one in Alberta, but the disproportionate contacts like that could be an indicator of a problem, but doesn't necessarily automatically mean that there's a problem. So what I mean by that is there would be very few things, actually, that if you were to map them out against the population demographics, that would actually completely mirror the population demographics. So all of that to say, I'm not sure that would be what we would expect is a breakdown that would be consistent with the population of Calgary. So, but I think that's part of why we're moving toward the race-based data, because we realize unless we have that disaggregated data, we're not going to know, and then we can dig deeper into why we think that is. But I do caution, the automatic assumption that because the number of street checks or the number of public complaints or whatever doesn't completely mirror the population demographics in the city, that is by itself an indicator of discrimination or disparity. It would be a disparity for sure, but it may not be a result of discrimination. So that's where we're driving to try to get that data so that we can look more closely into those things, work with community and see what's going on there. So that work continues, and I know you're a large proponent of it, and we certainly appreciate that. But yeah, that's sort of, I guess, the best answer I can give right now with respect to what we're doing locally and how that then sort of connects to what's happening nationally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Siddiqui.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Deputy Chief McCullen, for your report. I also saw the Happy Feet news items all over social media. It's very sweet to see. I have a question. In your report, you mentioned the external website that you're building. Can you give a little bit of information on that, and what will that external website hold? And is there an interaction piece with the community, et cetera?
Thanks, Commissioner, for your question. Great question. So without kind of disclosing who we're partnering with, because we haven't done a media release yet, we've been very fortunate to work with one of our universities in town here. And so you're absolutely bang on. It's going to be an opportunity to have the public exchange, send questions, comments, feedback, and then we're going to be able to respond, hopefully in real time. We'll have to monitor to see how much engagement we get, but it really will be an opportunity to share what we are doing internally in the Calgary Police Service and to continue to ask for additional feedback, additional recommendations, but that exchange piece and that interactive piece will be critical in moving forward so that we can be successful.
Sorry, and just to follow up, so is that, will then the website be monitored by your unit looking at, and so someone will be monitoring it and getting back to people rather quickly, et cetera?
Commissioner, that's exactly the goal that we have in mind. Again, we're being optimistic depending on what kind of volume we have, but you're absolutely bang on. It will be people from my team that will be monitoring that, and we'll be getting back to people either in real time or within a reasonable time frame.
I'm sorry, last question. What's the timing on that? When will that go live?
I'm hoping that it might be live, and I'm going to say around about February.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chief. Thanks, Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Rossell.
Deputy Chief McClellan, can you just speak a little bit more about how training at CPS has changed over the last year or so to address EDI and anti-racism? We talk a lot about what's happening at the internal ARAC, but kind of on a more broad level than the internal ARAC, what is happening there?
Thanks, Commissioner, for the question. And so we do have a lot of work to do in this area. As I said, we're working with the curriculum designers. We've hired some additional people to assist us. But we've got, and the Deputy Gill might be able to help me out here, there's been minimal training with our recruits, but it's something that we have as a priority, and him and his team have that in their radar as one of the focuses that we need to move forward early in the new year or mid-new year. Deputy Gill, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner, we've started some of the training already, but we are working closely with Deputy McClellan's team on the anti-racism committee with our training folks, developing training. We also have the crisis intervention training that we're also in the final touches of developing that. And our use of force policy with a strong component of de-escalation. It's also been, is in the final stages of approval. That should be coming to the executive team for approval here in the next 2 weeks. And in addition to that, in advance of those policies, our training folks have already been started working both in-service training members and our recruits on verbal articulation, de-escalation, and alternate response to people in crisis, in addition to some of the work that we've done operationally, such as the increase of the PAC resources.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I was going to ask one question, and perhaps I will still ask it further to Teresa's question. The unconscious bias training that's in the internal one, is that also one piece that you plan to roll out across the organization? And if so, do you have any thoughts about when that might happen?
Chair, that's a part of the suite. We've had various over the years, various trainings such as unconscious bias, de-escalation, brain story, and indigenous training, anti-racism training. Over the course of 2021, we've been taking a real stock of all of our training and where there's duplication and repetition, and really coming to a place where we have an ongoing training program that occurs on a regular basis for our folks, but they're not tripping over each other on those courses. So that's the work that my team is doing with Deputy McClellan's team. So we are continuing the training that we already have, such as gun conscious bias. We're also looking at a future state where we can look at having a suite of training, but that's not stepping over each other. Because historically what we've done is we've responded to an incident with a new training and we put it in there. We've never actually looked at it saying, how does that fit in with the rest of the training suite that we currently have? And we're going through that exercise as we speak.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm seeing no other questions on this topic. Can we move on to 5.4, the crime update?
You bet, Chair, and thanks for introducing that. And also thanks for acknowledging the hard work that's gone on over the past month with the number of homicides, serious injury and fatal collisions and all the other proactive work that's been going on. And I'll just do a high level because I'm mindful of the time, but I did want to raise a few things for the Commission's awareness. We continue to work through a number of different categories as per our annual policing plan, looking at guns, reducing gun violence, addressing drug-related harm, etc. So a couple good examples of things that pertain to that. We had a landlord-tenant dispute in District 1 here most recently, where there was a complaint of illegal items, things being stored that could be problematic. Patrol liaised with the district operations team to investigate that further, which ultimately resulted in a search warrant at the location and the seizure of about $825,000 worth of illegal drugs, about $8,000 in cash and some other evidence. Of importance with that seizure is there's about 1.5 kilograms of fentanyl, 4 kilograms of methamphetamine, and a variety of other ones that were removed from the streets of downtown, which I think is a significant impact. So there's other work continuing on that. A well-known offender was identified and involved, is currently still outstanding, and we're following through with that. But that's just an example of one effort to address drug-related harm in the core there. Another one around reducing gun violence and protecting vulnerable people. And this one is a bit of a unique one. It's around a 4-month-long fraud and firearms related operation that involved the Bureau of Investigative Support, the Firearms Investigative Team, and District 4 members. And that operation looked into the manufacturing, distribution, and sale of fraudulent firearm licenses, identity documents, and bank documents by a sophisticated fraud offender. This November, we executed a search warrant resulting in the recovery of numerous identification documents and the machinery to manufacture those items. The offender was charged with 23 offenses in relation to that particular crime. So although not a seizure of guns, it is seizing things that enable people to access guns and promote the illegal use of them. So a couple good examples there. I'll maybe go over some high level crime picture statistics as I did last month. And if it's useful to you, please let me know. If you want something else out of this report, please let us know. But monitoring some of the other trends, domestic violence, violent offenses continues to be down. I think last month we said it was down 18%. It's at 19% with our most recent report. The actual reporting of those occurrences though, pre-criminal code offense, like the more intervention type calls, is up 10%. So it's up 1% from September. Our residential and commercial B&Es both continue to be down. Last month they were down 31 and 34% respectively. They're at 30 and 34. So we're continuing that trend on reductions there. And same with vehicle theft and car prowlings are both bang on at the same percentage reductions for October as they were for September. Where we do see some trending that we are paying particular attention to is the continued social disorder. We were up 4% at the last report. We continue to be up 4% overall year to date. So those are of concern to us, and we are taking steps with proactive efforts in every district. So as part of our crime reduction approach, every meeting that we have with all the district commanders, we identify the priorities of which social disorder is one, and they each have their own unique plans to address that within each district. On the violence front, we are seeing an increase, or most recent increase in common assault and assault with a weapon. Those two offenses counted for 54% of violent incidences in October. Commercial robberies as well. They're about 6% of the total of violent non-domestic offenses. And we're seeing increases there. Those in particular are in relation to the pharmacy robberies and the cannabis store robberies. There's a lot of efforts going on to address those, both from an operations perspective. We have active operations going on both of those, but we also have prevention efforts going on. One of our CROs that's assigned to the robbery unit had a town hall with the various cannabis store owners, et cetera, to talk about options for crime prevention around some of those robberies. So those things have all continued to occur over the course of the last month, and we continue to follow through with that. But it has been a busier month this month, and we're watching each of those trends individually. I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that report. So questions, Commissioner Sang.
Thanks. Thanks, Deputy Chief Tawfiq. Do you have statistics about the traffic related data?
I do actually. Thanks for raising that, Commissioner. So when we look at the actual number of fatal collisions, and I know recently we've seen a number of these occur, so it's first and foremost to our minds right now. So there might be a tendency to think that it's a significant trend, and I'd say in the short term we might see one over the past week or two here. But for the year, we are at a total of 16 deaths by way of traffic collisions, which is lower than what we've seen in 2020, 2019. Going back to 2018 would be when we saw numbers like that. So we are seeing actual lower numbers of fatalities overall. That doesn't take away the impact of each and every one of them, because it is a tragic loss for families and everyone involved. When we look at serious injury and fatal collisions, to the end of October, we were still below prior years, 29% below 2020 and 24.5% below 2019. So overall, we've seen fewer, but the significance of some of these, I think, is what really causes us some additional concern. And I'll give you some perspective on that. Of the fatal collisions, we do see a trend of increase in pedestrian fatal collisions. So 8 of those fatalities are pedestrians, and we haven't seen anything like that in the prior years. So that is a trend that we're concerned about. We try to do education around that. Certainly we're promoting that through social media and other means. But as we move into December here with the holiday season upon us, we certainly are going to be ramping up our check stop program and focusing on impaired driving, given the powers that we have to us to try to make an impact on it. If there's anything else you'd like to know about the traffic stats, please let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Chief. Just while we're talking about the pedestrian part, I'm thinking, like, does CPS have any suggestion or input into the city's transportation planning team about like how they can improve from their perspective?
Absolutely. Actually, our traffic section is well connected in with the City of Calgary Traffic Management and Roads. In fact, they are contributing and participating in the Safer Mobility Plan, and the part of the Vision Zero. So they have been communicating not only on just things that we can do from an enforcement and maybe an education perspective, but from a prevention and engineering perspective as well, because they do have the experts with the city when they go to design roadways and speed limits and all of those things that we are connected in to give them some of the feedback from the trends that we're seeing.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Chief. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. That's an interesting one. The announcement earlier this week of the city looking at improvements to traffic flow over the next year. I wonder what the implications might be. I'm not sure there's an answer to that, but I'm glad to hear that you're involved with some of those discussions. So thank you. Any other questions on the crime trends update? Okay. Thank you very much for those reports. At this point, then we'll move back to report under section 5.1, which is the school resource officer report. So I will pass it back to you. Thanks.
Yeah, this is a bit more of an involved report, hence we wanted to present it last. And to introduce, I'll pass it over to Deputy McClellan.
Thanks, Chief. Thanks, Chair. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk about the school resource program. And thanks to many of you online who have provided us some guidance and some direction, sage advice on moving this forward. So we will look forward to your questions at the end of this presentation. As many of you may recall, last year we committed to review and an evaluation of our school resource officer SRO program. We presented the findings and recommendations of this report to the CPC Anti-Racism Committee on October 15th, as well as our other advisory boards. Although there were several opportunities to participate in this review and that we invested additional funds with the consultant for further engagement, we were still disappointed in the minimal engagement. In the past couple of months, we have presented and gathered feedback from 9 other stakeholders, including our external ARAC and the Youth Advisory Board, and we have added a new design phase to the project to respond to this feedback, which we are here to talk about today. We also have Staff Sergeant Beckenstead, who has been the Staff Sergeant for the SROs for the past 5 years, who will speak in a few minutes, and then we will have Business Strategist Jason Archibald talk about the review, recommendations and next steps, and then we'll have some comments from the Chief. We know this next phase must be more than our SROs. It must be a holistic engagement strategy with all youths. We want to rebrand and include all youth programs and align them better with our incredible city partners, where we will work collaboratively with all stakeholders to transform the SRO program. We must assess our current deployment model with a focus to remain on our youth by ensuring we are dedicated to education, prevention, and intervention. We acknowledge and are aware of the history of other police services and their actions with students in schools. Although we have heard some positive stories, we know it has not always worked the way that police has wanted it to, and there has been trauma. We will ensure that we apply an EDI lens going forward, and that we must solidify and continue with our anti-racism training. It is noteworthy that while we have 38 SRO positions, we only have 23 actual members deployed in the schools. Since 2018, SROs deferred the highest proportion of youth out of the criminal justice system. These members serve 450 schools across 4 school boards in the Calgary area, as well as additional faith-based schools. Of note, on November 19th, many of us attended the annual Calgary Police Youth Foundation Chief Youth Courage Awards, where we celebrated the achievements of youths who had participated in the 6 CPYF CPS programs. Our SROs played significant roles in assisting all of the amazing recipients who were recognized. The gala was also an opportunity to recognize a philanthropic leader in the community, in which this honor was bestowed upon the Shaw family, who made a further contribution of $2 million to support the CPYF CPS youth programs. Along with the CPYF, we couldn't be more thankful and appreciative of this very generous donation, as well as the amazing partnership that we have. We're greatly appreciative of the CPYF leadership team in organizing this gala and for acknowledging the valuable partnerships that we enjoy in delivering these youth programs to the community. You may have heard recently in the past month, some of our SROs were involved in 2 high-profile incidents in the schools. I am happy to answer any questions about these incidents later. Please let me turn it over to Staff Sergeant Beckenstead, who will share his experiences and knowledge with respect to the SROs, and then we will hear from our business strategist and then the chief. Thank you. Staff Sergeant Beckenstead.
Thank you, Deputy. Good afternoon, Chief, Chair Cornet, Commission members, ELT, SLT, and our community members who are viewing. I am Staff Sergeant Ralph Beckenstead, and I've been very fortunate in being involved in overseeing the School Resource Officer program, as the Deputy has said, for the past 5 years. My presentation to you today is a very condensed version for what I had previously presented, as I had already spoken in front of the Police Commission's Anti-Racism Committee, and we've done several presentations to several of our other community boards. This will provide more time at the end of our presentation to answer, which I'm sure many of the questions that the Police Commission must have. So what does it mean to have a police officer in Calgary schools? It means all students have direct access to a police officer, and that access is the start of the relationship building process. From there, all parents can branch out and have access to that police officer through their children. The SRO program focuses on that introduction of police into the lives of as many children as we can, and to build and grow with them throughout their academic journey and to be a resource as they mature into adulthood. The program's primary focus in Calgary is that relationship building piece and to keep kids safe and youth away from victimization and criminality. School resource officers are a frontline patrol resource. The members focus on the proactive community-based approach and not necessarily your typical reactionary policing. Every effort is made to educate and divert youth away from the criminal justice system. When an arrest needs to be made, our SROs work in the background and are as discreet as possible. We escort students out, and when you think of the typical arrest, placing youth on the ground or the use of handcuffs and force, this is an absolute last resort for our officers. An SRO will respond to all major events in their schools and are the resource and support for the students involved. They're the resource for school administration and for the frontline officers who are also responding. They are directly involved in all files that involve teachers, staff, or school executives that are serious or sensitive in nature. We assist the Luna Child Advocacy Center, child abuse, SAIU, domestic conflict, and I like to call us the conduit to all these areas. There are internal processes in place and our school board agreements on how to enter schools, interview students and staff, and how to make safe arrests when it comes to youth. An SRO is responsible for their calls for service in their schools and their surrounding communities, those calls that are taken away from the frontline patrol response. The calls that come out will vary because of those relationships forged between schools and the students. Those pre-existing informed relationships help the SROs resolve more service complaints and identify more youth than any other area in our organization. Basically, officers know their kids. The deputy alluded earlier to our SROs that they use both gateway and extrajudicial sanctions and are responsible for 65% or more of all referrals outside of charging young students. This statistic alone speaks to the diversion away from criminality that's already being done in the organization. Our SROs have also taken on the burden of responding and coordinating all CPS calls for service to schools and report to child suicides and engage with their families. The work here with families, students, schools, and staff only just begins once the event's concluded. Over one calendar year, there were more than 149 events and referrals to us, and there were 28 recorded student suicides just within 1 year. We attend all schools and student-generated protests. Looking ahead, the SRO long-term community policing goals are already structured around the relationship building pieces, the educational components, and the proactive approach with youth. The SRO program's ability to make relationships with students continues to evolve and is always changing as we find better ways to make new inroads with the community and within all their schools. Just alone, our proactive hiring process to select and hire new SROs, coupled with diverse and extensive ongoing training and education, has allowed the program to endure while many organizations' programs have not. Our advanced lockdown training and applications occur twice per year. We look at resilience in children, crime, junior high drug programming, and our newest application of the Bullying Ends Here program through Constable Tad Milmine has furthered our reach into the lives of students in the community. Training is not just for the SROs, but our external partners, teachers, and the school administration. We supply and work with these partners on their role of the SRO in school settings, intervention, police procedures, lockdowns, workshops, crowd control, and crowd management for large student gatherings and events. The CPS and our youth education supervisory team supports and encourages the SROs to volunteer and support other community-based and what is considered outside of school event and their patrol duties. These can range from fundraising, bike-a-thons, clubs, parent-teacher evenings, school council, religious celebrations, charity events, summer camps, and programs set out by the Calgary Police Youth Foundation. I'm sure you all recognize Power Play. Internally to each school, many of our SROs participate and sit in on their school's GSAs, coach sport teams, and help with the performing arts programs. They attend games and events, adjusting their schedules to work with the Calgary Senior High Athletics Association. And most recently, SROs stepping in when it was identified that even at the high school level, students are hungry and someone needs to feed them. We're more proactive and interconnected with other programs than most other agencies. We constantly talk about our partnerships with the Calgary Police Police Youth Foundation, Youth Link, the Integrated School Support Program, the newly stood up Youth Advisory Board, the existing relationships and partnerships like AMA and Safety City, training up to 8,000 patrollers yearly, speaking on the importance of traffic safety with young students, or working with Circle K on positive ticketing, or the presentations conducted in partnership with the University of Calgary as guest presenters in law and ethics. The School Resource Officer Program within Calgary is very complex as it addresses the needs of students from kindergarten to high school and spans each of our diverse school boards. As indicated by the deputy, we're in over 450 plus schools. The school resource officers are an integral to the development of our children and are the conduit to the needs of the community. Normally, I would speak anecdotally and provide background stories of the work that are being done by the SROs. I will leave those during the answer and question period that you will have later. I appreciate your time and would now like to move the presentation over to my partner, Mr. Jason Archibald.
Thanks very much, staff. Can everybody hear me okay? Wonderful. Yeah, I seem to have some technology challenges. I'm stuck working at home today. I'm a little bit sick, so I do apologize. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. But yes, please let me know if you're having any trouble hearing me. Okay. All right. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay. So yeah, my name is Jason Archibald. I'm a business strategist with Calgary Police Service. I'm here today to talk to you about the School Resource Officer evaluation. I'll be talking about the independent evaluation of the SRO program and where we're planning to go from here. So how did we get here? CPS promised an independent evaluation of the SRO program in 2020. This was in response to the City Council's June 15th notice of motion, and it's one of our commitments to anti-racism. To put this into a little perspective, at the beginning of this conversation, other jurisdictions were making decisions to pause or cancel their programs. In all cases, except for here, these were undertaken by school boards, not police agencies. Some undertook reviews, others did not. But CPS has committed to an evidence-based approach instead of immediate suspension of the program. So our evaluation goals were essentially to determine if the program is achieving equitable outcomes for all students, including students that are Black, Indigenous, and from racialized communities, but also to identify any other program gaps. So I'll quickly walk you through the first phase. The first phase involved us hiring an independent consultant. So we hired Argyle PR. They were our independent consultant at the end of December of 2020. They in turn worked with Action Dignity and Engage Calgary to speak with students, parents, teachers, school boards, school resource officers, and community partners across the city. They received over 1,900 responses across 4 months of virtual engagement. Yeah, so because of COVID, I think we had planned to have in-person facilitation happening with students in schools, and that just wasn't possible during that time. So that has resulted in a limitation to the ways that we were able to engage with students. So the findings of the report: overall, most students experience positive outcomes. However, some students experience fear, discomfort, anxiety around police, and some students have reported unequal treatment by police. So we received the Argyle report at the end of August, and we spent the last 2 months taking the report around to 10 stakeholder agencies. One of them was the CPC Anti-Racism Committee. So a few of you have already heard me speak about this. We also spoke with school boards, with our Youth Advisory Board, and with the External Anti-Racism Action Committee. So what we heard from these groups essentially is that they've got concerns with gaps in student consultation. And like I said earlier, this really ties back to COVID and being fairly limited on being able to get direct contact with students. The importance of including views of racialized and marginalized students in the redesign of the program, and the importance of collaboration in the redesign of the program. So where are we planning to go from here? So we put together, based on this feedback that we received from these 10 partner agencies, we put together a design plan. So our design plan consists of 3 points. The first point is to re-engage with students. Clearly, we need to go back and we need to talk to specifically the students that are impacted. So we will do that. Then we are planning to hold a roundtable session with the goal of building a collaborative action plan together. So we want to have everybody at the table and all sit down where CPS is one voice out of many, but we all share our stories and experiences and have frank conversations and build an action plan. And then we'd like to appoint an oversight board to oversee the implementation of that action plan. So I think it's clear that that we have not done enough consultation with students, that some voices are not as loud as they need to be. So with that feedback, we will essentially first develop a plan to reach impacted students. So we'll work with Calgary Police Commission, Anti-Racism Committee. We'll work with the with external ARAC, the CPS, Youth Advisory Board, and school boards to develop this plan. And then we'll take that plan into the schools, where the focus will be reaching Black, Indigenous, and racialized students. That's the critical component. Understanding root causes of the issues raised, and understanding if other issues exist or need examination. Before I talk about this, I want to give you a tiny bit of background here. To this point in our consultation process, CPS has really been the conduit through which all stakeholders have been talking. And we've also been essentially the agency who are speaking on behalf of other stakeholders. So we're communicating, we're like the hub, and we're like communicating between all these stakeholders. So instead, we kind of want to turn that on its head and initiate inclusive engagement, where we can break down silos between stakeholders and work together on a path forward. So we essentially are modeling this roundtable session and collaborative action plan on a 2014 provincial government roundtable session that dealt with children in care. This session brought together voices that don't usually talk to each other, had them engage in difficult conversations, and then they planned a way forward. I think they developed a 5-point plan. So using that model, we put together this model here. So we're going to have a roundtable session. This is after we've done our student re-engagement. It'll be inclusive of all stakeholders, including groups identified by the CPC. It'll be facilitated by an external facilitator. You'll have all stakeholders share their perspectives and experiences, and have everyone in turn listen to what everyone else is saying. We'll discuss the issues identified in the Argyle report and discuss the role that CPS and its partnership play in addressing these issues. So the way I see it, we'll all come together, we'll have this experience, we'll develop an action plan together, and then essentially appoint an oversight board to ensure the implementation of that plan. So step 3 will be the oversight board. The oversight board will be appointed by the participants of the roundtable session. It'll be comprised of stakeholders external to CPS, school boards, and other partner agencies. It'll function as an extension of the roundtable session. So if we have questions that come up during implementation, instead of pulling everybody back together, we can talk to the oversight board to clear up those issues. The board will oversee the implementation of the collaborative action plan, provide status updates to CPS and its partners, and it'll exist for the duration of the program transformation. In terms of timelines, I have not planned this out in its entirety yet, but this is the high level picture. In the first half of 2022, I'm planning to put together our plan for student re-engagement and then actually do the student re-engagement before the end of the school year. Is our sort of target endpoint there. For the roundtable session, that has to take place after we talk to students in case there are other issues that come up. And so these students can also be involved. That'll happen at the end of Q2 likely. And then we'll have the special oversight boards, oversee the implementation of the action plan, hopefully at the start of the new school year. I suspect this will take longer than 4 months to implement. So likely this little plus sign here means that likely this will spill over into the next year. In terms of guiding principles, essentially the goals of this design process are to amplify the voices that are not typically heard. As I've already said, remove silos between stakeholders and avoid bias or the perception of bias in solution development. Progress updates will flow through, they will come from the Oversight Board to us and also to CPC Anti-Racism Committee. And I just want to reiterate that CPS is committed to transformation. We're committed to redefining and reimagining the SRO program. Okay, so that's my piece. I think I'll turn it now back to the chief, who I think has some other comments to add.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. And thanks a lot to Ralph. And I know that Bruce Walker's here as well, and the folks for the presentation. I think what we saw in the first phase of the independent review that we committed was that we had strong feedback and mostly positive feedback in relation to stakeholders around the SRO program. I think this was about putting an anti-racist lens on the look at the program to say, let's not just go with the majority here and say that the majority likes this and let's move forward. Let's make sure that we are actually taking further and additional steps to amplify the voices of those who aren't experiencing the program in the same way, and make sure that we actually can engage with those folks more closely to better understand what some of the issues will be. I think one of the things that you're well aware of in the discussions that we've had is that the youth engagement program, whatever that might look like going forward, but youth engagement and prevention and intervention has been such a fundamentally staple portion of the Calgary Police Service's sort of commitment to community-based policing, going back a long, long way. So that's why you would see that the Calgary Police Youth Foundation had made a decision back when it was first created to focus specifically on youth in the city. That was to live out that commitment. The other foundations, if you compare other foundations around the country, they have a much broader mandate and do many things. That's one thing that's unique here in Calgary, is that the focus is specifically on youth. That led to the construction of YouthLink. And of course, YouthLink, for those that have been there, is an amazing award-winning facility. And if you think of the number of students that go through there every year, whether it be on school visits, whether it be on tours, and even summer camps, the link, like I say, we receive people and visitors from other cities around North America to look at what we're doing with YouthLink and those areas wanting to build something similar. The whole focus of the program around the youth engagement has not been this proverbial, which I believe is a US narrative, the proverbial pipeline to prison. That has not been the model. It never has been right from the beginning. As Ralph said, the officers connected to the schools look for every opportunity to prevent victimization and to ensure young people don't end up in the criminal justice system, and actually do a lot of work to make sure that they don't. So I think that work has been really important to the success of the program. Now we realize that in 2021, we're hearing that there's some evolution and some more work to be done to make sure that every student can feel like, if they want to, they can access some of those youth engagement programs in a fair and equitable way. And so that's the next step for us, is to say, okay, let's do a further and additional engagement to make sure that we are hearing those voices and we very much understand where the concerns lie, so that moving forward with the program, we can make sure that we have the most inclusive, equitable program that we're able to going forward. So I guess I'll leave it at that. I'm sure you have some questions, and between the group here, we'd be very pleased to answer them. Thank you.
Sorry, I think I froze there for a moment. So thank you very much for the information, and I'll turn it over to questions. Commissioner Mellon.
Thank you. I've been thinking about this program because we have at the committee level had this conversation before, and there have been a number of concerns raised. So I was just thinking in my mind, how did it come about? And I'm assuming that it was developed in and around the 70s, and that it was developed because CPS had some objectives. And I'm assuming the objectives would be how to engage with youth in a non-threatening way, and how to engage in collaboration with the school boards. And there may have been others. So we developed the SRO program. Now, 45 years later, Calgary is 3 times the population and far more diverse than it was in the 70s. So now you're relooking at the program. You evaluated the SRO program. 30% of people had some difficulties with it. So why do we take all this action to transform the SRO program? Why would we not go back to principle as you likely did in the 70s and say, CPS needs to engage with youth in Calgary in a non-threatening manner. We need to have relationships with the schools, and there may be other objectives. So then you follow your process as outlined. The multi-stakeholder model, I think, is totally appropriate, but rather than saying we're fixing SRO, we're now creating a 2022 strategy to achieve those outcomes. And then we're not stuck with saying, are we going to keep SRO? Or are we not going to keep SRO? Obviously, CPS has to engage with youth and has to be in partnership with the schools. So if you take out the SRO focus and carry on with your plan, you may come up with some new ways of engaging with schools and students in schools, and you may come up with some elements of SRO may move into it. But if you can kind of drop the focus on transformation of SRO and put it back to principle and how are we going to meet these objectives? I just wondered if some of the concerns about just taking something that is broken for some people and fixing it might be less of a concern. Just food for thought, I guess.
It's a great point. Thank you, Commissioner Mellon. I actually think we are saying the same thing in the presentations there. I think that was kind of the message we were trying to convey, is that we're open to transformation of the program. I guess we talk about the evaluation of the SRO program is because that's what we're doing. There was talk about, I think a decade ago, about doing an independent evaluation, and it never got done because at that time the stakeholders were happy with the outcomes, and that was a different time, and so that piece didn't get done. But that's exactly what we're saying, is we're recognizing that that's where we've been focused in the schools. But I think it's broader than that, and I think Ralph and others referred to that a youth engagement, a broader youth engagement strategy would include the schools, but it wouldn't be necessarily. As we go forward with the consultations, that's exactly what we're looking at, is how do we take a more holistic approach, and how do we do the best engagement with you in 20.
Well, and I agree with that, and I agree that a lot of what you're saying is kind of what I'm thinking, but all your titles and all your framing is still the SRO program, and that will perhaps connotate for some of the people it didn't work for. If you're using those terms, it could very well be a block to creating new ways of dealing with people. That's just a thought.
Your points are understood. Thank you. Point well taken.
Commissioner Rosell.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Mellon on that. I like the idea of the consultation that you guys are undertaking, but I think it's entirely possible that alternate approaches might come up through that consultation. My question was related to that in a way. I know the school boards have been big supporters of the SRO program, and I just wanted to get something kind of clear in my mind. In your view, what is it that drives a school board's preference for having an SRO in the school versus having a social worker or of some sort on staff and just kind of pulling in CPS when needed? Like, is it because the highest proportion of the work being done is police related work that those other groups wouldn't be best groups to deal with, or are there other reasons? I just wanted to get your view on that.
I can answer that, Commissioner. So when you look at our SRO program in Calgary, what makes it successful over a lot of other jurisdictions is at the levels that we engage with children and youth. As I talked about in my presentation, when you're dealing with children and looking at safety and resiliency, it's all about establishing relationships with the Calgary Police, because at some point in everybody's life, no matter what it is, there will be an interaction with police. A lot of times those interactions are not favorable because they're at the lowest and the darkest times for most Calgarians. So to be able to build relationships when you're interacting with the police at some of your best times, when you're learning and you're maturing, and as our program moves children through maturity at the junior high level, where there's critical decisions being made, onto senior high, there are different applications, different trainings. It's like apples and oranges. Other programs, the SROs, are engaged nearly at the senior high level, or they're in 3 of the schools, or they're responding to calls for service and criminality. Ours is and always has been engaging with the community, starting them from ground zero and moving when they move into adulthood and to post-secondary. If we had the resources, I would love to look at a program that engages at the college, university, secondary, all those levels, as I believe in through everyone's life, you need to have those positive relationships with police for at that point when there is crisis or we are responding to assist, there's already established relationships.
Thanks, that's very helpful. So the focus for you then is kind of, as Commissioner Mallon said, like very much about the relationship building, like you said, kind of pivotal times.
Sorry, Commissioner Rosa, we couldn't hear that last question.
Right. So the focus for you is really, as Commissioner Mallon said, very much about kind of relationship building at those pivotal moments in their lives.
Sorry, can you go again? You're good near the end there, but not the beginning.
Sometimes my speaker kept up. Sorry. So I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear. Like, so that can you hear me now? Okay. So the focus for you is kind of like what Commissioner Mallon said. So it's really very much about the relationship building with youth at those pivotal times in their lives. Like that's the main piece of it.
I think Ralph's going to add here, but I think one of the other pieces is that the police end up at the schools anyway, whether it's for calls for service or whether it's because there's large events like in the larger schools, large sporting events or lockdowns or whatever. The police end up there anyway. So the idea is, like all good sort of community policing initiatives, if there's a familiarity and some relationships, that often is very helpful, and some context. You're not sort of starting at sort of behind the line of scrimmage, if you will. So I think it's helpful to have police placed there and relationships built ahead of time prior to there being issues. It just sort of, I think, the process. But Ralph, do you want to build on that?
Yes, thanks, Chief. And that's exactly correct. Schools are our largest target audience, if you want to look at it that way. And the shifting and the scheduling we do with SROs is to have them in the schools as often as possible to build those relationships. You can have a frontline patrol officer who has similar training, is an excellent officer that you're going to attend, but how often are they in schools? They don't understand the policies and the procedures. They don't have the relationship built with school staff and administration, and they're performing a function of reactionary policing when that crisis occurs. Whereas an officer in the school can head that off. They can see crisis coming. Or in the event of crisis, they've already built a relationship that there's a level of trust we're trying to establish when the school comes to them, when the student comes to them, parents, community, and says, we have this issue. They're more equipped, better equipped to deal with it than an officer that just previously went the week of nights, call response coming in, and it's just another call for service.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Walcott.
I'm coming into this a little, first off, let me just say thank you all for the questions so far. They've been great. I'm coming into this from a little bit of a different perspective as a teacher who worked in high school, I should say, before I came into my new role. And I guess I must kind of maybe reframe Commissioner Rosa's question in the sense as to the relationship between school resource officers and the school board, less so the relationship between school resource officers and the students. What you just described is essentially the outcome of the program, but not actually the establishment of need. And I would ask the question of the outcomes that you're describing reaching through the relationships between SROs and police officers, much like a lot of the work that we are doing and with alternative response models. I raise the question of, do you not believe that if we are seeking alternative response models in external policing and in community policing, that we should also be doing something similar in school programs as well? Like we've had this discussion in schools about having more social workers, more psychologists, because I'll give you an example. Currently, we have the same amount of psychologists per schools that we do school resource officers. So there's a question of resource distribution based on the outcomes that we are seeking. So just as one final comment before I dive into that question, and it follows up on a previous one, is if our outcome is to intervene with students at the lowest points in their life in advance of criminality, in advance of mental health distress and disorders, is a police officer trained enough to do that work? And are SROs trained any more than a standard police officer would be, especially as you're looking toward educational reform within the training?
Maybe what I'll do is start and then I'll toss it to Ralph again, because I know he's got a lot of background around the training and that sort of thing. But I almost see it, Councillor Walcott, as a sort of a continuum of services. To your point about training, I mean, certainly the SROs wouldn't purport to replace or do the work that trained psychologists would do in schools for kids that need that type of an intervention. But I think you see, sort of further up the continuum, or even running concurrently with some of those, you see a lot of young people who actually want to engage school resource officers and who do it all the time. And those folks end up, the school resource officers I'm referring to, end up being a very positive influence in the lives of those individuals. So they're not trying to replace anybody in any other resources in the schools, they're trying to be another one. And I think when you think about your police service and the commitment to building relationships across the continuum, like across the spectrum of the population, you wouldn't want to leave youth out for a bunch of very good valid reasons. I think at the end of the day, I think people having positive relationships with the police is really important for, later on in life if things happen, and being able to be comfortable reaching out around things that are already underreported, whether it be domestic violence or whether it be sexual violence or whatever it might be. I think certainly individuals who have a comfort level with their police services in the city where they live, I think that actually adds to the social value. So I don't think these are resources that are trying to, it's not, once again, it's not necessarily an either or, hopefully it's a both and. But Ralph, do you want to talk to the training side of things?
You bet. Thanks, Commissioner. So I'm not sure if you were on some of the original presentations that Jason and I had conducted with the various boards, but there's a very robust training cycle and development of programs that we put SROs through. So before I look at some of the training, just to add on to what the chief has said to answer hopefully some of your questions, sir, is absolutely. When I talk about the lowest times in crisis, a lot of times that's a frame of reference that we as adults can understand. But when you're dealing with kids in elementary, when you're dealing with young people that are impressionable, the programming we teach and work with the psychologists, the counselors, the teachers, independent living, all the other programs the SROs are involved with, is to build that relationship so that if they ever do reach crisis, they're more apt to be able to deal with it. They understand the role of police. They understand the presence of the uniform, which is a large part. We talked a little bit earlier too in the presentation where we talk about how we're making transformational change, the things we're looking at about softer uniforms, about being more approachable. The program from the 70s has evolved so much, and that's because of the community. And as events happen in real time, we do our best to adjust. Are we always on top of it? Absolutely not. But we take the information in, we adjust our training, we adjust our practices, and we move forward. We talked earlier about the Brain Stories certification from K to 12, very important to reach that early childhood development so SROs understand why it is kids are doing what they're doing. Heavy on the respect in the workplace, mental health, first aid, leading with the brain certification, strategic communication, the school lockdown program, which I'll put up against any agency in North America for what we do within our schools to protect our students. The development of our SRO 100 and 200, gender-based analysis, Aboriginal justice, lead schools and child soldiers, and I could go on and on. Education is not enough. As we talked and Jason spoke to the strategies, it's about working with you folks in the community, about sitting down. But to remove SROs and the relationship from the school when police are going to attend anyway, in my mind anyway, doesn't equate to that community-based policing and relationship building. Does that help a little bit, Commissioner?
No, to be blunt.
Go ahead, let's try it again.
And I'll tell you why. Because my immediate question would be is why don't all police officers have the training that you just listed, considering that it's not that transformational? The gender-based analysis, the mental health awareness that you just described, really like functionally, you just listed off the things that I would have expected from any officer that is dealing with vulnerable people. And that's all officers, right? So the second part about it is that this description of the relations that you're describing as an educator myself, I've never seen them. I've seen like you got 38 officers and 118,000 students in one school board, let alone the other 75,000 in another school board. The outcome is my question, right? Is the vision that you're describing, it's absolutely, honestly, like it's good work, but is the outcome even achievable in the program that you're describing based off of the numbers that exist, as well as the training that, from my understanding, my hope is that every officer should receive, so that if you are called, you would actually be providing the same amount of service to the school, whether or not you're a resource officer or just someone who was called as per, maybe the school wanted to just organize its yearly, like its biannually lockdown program. So I'm struggling to see how any of that is above and beyond what I would suggest would be in the traditional curriculum of teaching or of policing. And maybe that's a question toward Chief McClellan to see about including some of that work in just the general curriculum.
That one thing, I think fair points, Councillor Walcott. I would say one thing, the training though is just one piece of it. I think the passion for youth and folks wanting to work specifically with youth. We have individuals that actually come to the Calgary Police Service for a career specifically because they want to work with youth. So I think of one school resource officer who actually has an education degree and a psychology degree. And he actually came to the police service, to the work, because he wanted to work with youth and has worked for a long time in that area. So it brings a lot of skill set to that, but more importantly, perhaps, a passion and wanting to work with that group. We have people that come from nursing because they want to work with elderly people. So they go into youth unit or elder abuse unit and this type of thing. And that's one of the things I think is helpful. But we also have Andrea Urquhart. I didn't realize this, but she's on the line and would like to comment. Andrea works with the Calgary Police Service now, but has been a senior executive with Calgary Catholic and has something to add.
Chair, if I could address Executive Director Spicer, I forgot to add her onto the list of participants. So Heather, if you get a chance, can you let Andrea in, please?
Yes, I've just done that. Thank you.
Hi, all. Hopefully you can hear me. I just jumped in. So good evening and welcome, Commissioner Walcott. It's nice to have another teacher in the fray. As some of you know, I in my former life was a teacher, vice principal, and principal, both at the high school and junior high level in one of the large school boards here in Calgary. And have to say that the school resource officer, that was actually one of my portfolios to manage that, along with our teacher counselors. So our typically teacher counselors, both in the public and separate boards, have to have a master's degree in psychology. So they actually are social workers or psychologists, right, within the school, especially at the high school level, as well as at the junior high level if they have a teacher counselor. So the school resource officer really is one piece of a wraparound approach to support the needs of students as they journey through their educational life within a school district. And I don't want to speak for the school districts Obviously, I'm no longer there, and my portfolio and commitment is to CPS. But I do know in the past that we relied very heavily on that presence of the SRO for their expertise in things that teachers, school districts, and social workers don't have expertise in. And so when you have students in crisis and you're working on a Form 10, for example, having a police officer that knows the ropes and knows where to go and what to do, and is a familiar face to a student who is absolutely in crisis is really important. And while there are always improvements that could be made to the SRO program in connecting with all students, I can tell you from personal experience, both as a teacher in a high school that was extremely diverse and multicultural, all the way up to that principal of that same school, that the SRO program was fundamental in our approach from an administrative standpoint to support the needs of the school. And I think the idea to, as Commissioner Mellon spoke about, to reimagine, we should be reimagining all of the time and iterating and pivoting to meet the needs of our students. So, I look forward to seeing what this committee has to offer, but certainly from a perspective of having experienced the SRO program as boots on the ground in a different way, I can only tell you that was an extremely effective program, both from a parental standpoint, the parents that I spoke to, as well as a teacher, vice principal, and principal.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the questions, Councillor Walcott. Just in thinking of time, I think these are some of the comments that need to go into the design phase, absolutely, and look at what that looks like. I'd like to get the next two questions if there are no others that you have to ask at this point, Councillor Walcott.
No, I'm very self-aware that I took up a lot of time. So
No, those are valuable questions and absolutely perspectives that we need to have. So thank you very much. If I can ask Commissioner North Pay again to please go ahead.
Yes, thanks for that update. I guess my concern comes from the engagement process that you were discussing that needs to be re-engaged with the students. We seem to be revisiting this issue quite often, and how to engage our Indigenous and our Black student populations. And we, whether it's recruiting, whether it's student engagement, whether it's community engagement, we seem to be revisiting this issue over and over again. What I'm saying is that maybe we need to sit down and I'm really interested to see how this this process that you're talking about is going to be replanned and reimagined to actually include those voices that are missing from this. Now, I think what we're actually dealing with when it comes to this issue is that a lot of the commissioners here are feeling very uncomfortable with the narrow scope of this study, and it actually just aimed at the the resource officer program. I think what we're interested in seeing is a little bit of an open-mindedness going into this project layout, because you could be picking up other ideas along the way, and there is a possibility when you bring those voices to the table that are missing, that this program might not be wanted. So, how are we going to deal with that when we come to the end of the road? So we need to start being open-minded about this. And, I'm finding that narrow scope a little bit uncomfortable as well. We need to expand that out a little bit. But that's all I had to say is, number one, we need to figure out this engagement process, because the way we're doing things is not working right now.
Thank you, Commissioner North again. Commissioner Siddiqui.
Thank you, Chair. My question is more of a sort of a current question that's occurring right now, and I understand I'm moving away from the design process in this topic a bit. Can you give a little bit of insight? There's been quite a few protests across the schools in Calgary in terms of youth who are talking about sexual assaults that are occurring, the school board not paying attention or doing anything about them. Can you tell me the role does the school resource officers have in that, and CPS has? I understand that you might not be able to do anything officially until there's a charge, but is there any sort of proactive behavior that's occurring with those youth right now?
Thanks for the question, Commissioner. It's Inspector Bruce Walker. I think at first glance, we need to look at the fact of it's empowering for these youth to come forward to express, their concerns, one about whether it's the school board. It's another thing to talk about sexual violence. And, in my experience, it is a very low reporting crime. Typically, when the SRO steps in, a lot of the referrals that go to our Luna Center or the Child Abuse Unit stems from the SROs that are in the schools that are communicating with the youth on day-to-day interactions. And, from an investigative point of view, it's, we provide the wraparound support in the school from the SRO perspective, but any of the forensic interviewing that's done typically moves forward to our Child Abuse Unit. And we're very cautious about how much investigatively as we're working with the youth in that process, because once again, once we sort of delve into more of the interactions criminally, we want that wraparound support at the Luna Center or the Child Abuse Unit at our Child Advocacy Center. That answers your question.
Not quite, Inspector. I guess more kind of the answer you're giving me is more that it's reactive. So it's not a proactive in terms of, it started at one school, it spread across the city. And I'm just curious if there's any proactive or any engagement happening with these youth, with the SROs, so that more folks would come forward and there would be higher reporting.
Talk about that.
Yeah, and no, and sorry if I misunderstood your question. And I mean, I know the process right now, especially for me in my role, is that I'm working with the school boards in addressing these concerns or issues that have risen, that have come across our doorstep here in the last few weeks. So those are something that I personally will be dealing with based on my previous experience working in the sexual assault investigative unit.
And Commissioner Siddiqui, I'll just add that Inspector Walker, as he said, he's working with the school boards. So exactly what you talked about, what's that prevention piece? What's that education piece? How do we teach the students how to report, when to report, who to report, all of that? So you're absolutely bang on. We've got the reactive piece and we've got the preventative piece. And that's what Bruce is working with on the school boards. And in fact, there's a meeting on Friday. And I and others have spoken briefly with the management level. And they're working out that strategy to share with the schools going forward as of this Friday. At least the conversations are going to happen this week to talk about that.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Commissioner Campbell.
Sorry. Thank you very much, Chair Cornett. Deputy McClellan, I thank you. I appreciate that you acknowledged the history and the disappointment with the SRO program as it's existed since the 70s. In certain cases, it has caused trauma. And I would be remiss if I didn't name the systemic racism and the colonialism and some of the fundamental racist history of that program and acknowledge that history. And I thank you for acknowledging it. My disappointment really stems from the absence of that important history in the program review and in the design review, in the report and in our program design approach. If we do not have a fundamental understanding of where we've come from and what our history is, they always say we're doomed to repeat it, but we're not addressing the fundamental concerns with that program. We need to stop calling it the prevailing issue or the concerns and call it exactly what it is, and that's racism. That's the concern that we're dealing with the SRO program. So my hope, and I think I'm actually going to say, I'm going to take back the word hope because hope's not a strategy. And I'm going to say my expectation is that in all of the engagement process and in all of the program design reviews, we openly and transparently acknowledge that history and that background as we go forward. My question really stems to understanding the decisions of other jurisdictions, both school-wise and police-based, where they have eliminated their school resource officer program or school liaison officer program. Even in the BC Human Rights Commission report that I mentioned earlier this meeting, there are recommendations in that report to end the school liaison officer programs unless they can demonstrate an evidence-based need for them that can't be met through other means, speaking to the comments that Commissioner Councillor Walcott made. So is there a process by which we include the information from other jurisdictions like Waterloo, Toronto, Peel, Edmonton, Ottawa, Vancouver, Winnipeg, who have eliminated their school resource officer programs?
Thanks very much, Commissioner Campbell, and thanks very much for your acknowledgement. And I absolutely agree that the history and the background needs to be included in moving forward. Otherwise, we're just not going to be successful as we hope, and might repeat the same mistake. So thank you for ensuring that we have that included, and you have my word that that will be included going forward. Since we last spoke at the CPC ARAC, there was many different organizations that were discussed and talked about, and we have in fact looked into many of them. And without throwing some of our policing partners under the bus, I will just share that you are correct in that we need to look to them to see what it is that they've done and why they've done it, why they're not in schools, what it is that they're doing to change, what are their lessons learned, what are the pros and cons to an either SRO program or another program that's more holistic and around the entirety of supporting our youth. So as I said, we've looked into many of them canceled them because they're looking at other alternatives. 3 different departments. Other departments are looking to redefine their relationships with police. The remainder, there's 5 on the list here, have suspended their programs, but again are working to redefine their relationships. It seems like a couple of the agencies collapsed their programs, and the information that we got appeared to be some public pressure, and there was no real review that was conducted. But they are going back to look at that and do a proper review. So it sounds like many of the agencies across the country are doing similar things. And but as you have said, it's important to look both nationally and internationally to see what has been successful and what has not, and how can we be number 1 in the country and make it the best for our entire youth going forward.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief McClellan. It's, I think about my own youth, and of course, I grew up with SROs in school in my elementary, junior, and high schools in Burlington, Ontario. But there's a certain transition between when the SRO is there as a support for being a safety patroller, and of course, you know that I was the captain of my safety patrol. And when that SRO moves to being who assumes that the 6 Black children in a high school of 1,200 are dealing drugs, and that's inappropriate.
Thank you very much for this discussion. It's been very, very valuable. I think that sort of the messages or themes that have come forward is that you're looking at redesigning and really diving farther into the whole issue. And I think that the messages that you heard from us to take away is the really acknowledging the historical background, really focusing on the idea of looking at all of this through an anti-racist lens, really looking into the engagement of people, as Commissioner North began, said, and what can we do here better with that regard over the next while. And then really truly reimagining this with, in terms of outcomes, as Commissioner Walcott said, and Commissioner Mallon. I think there's some themes there that we hope to see as it comes forward through the next part of your process there. So thank you very much for all of this. And if there's no other concerns or questions, I'd like to move on to the next parts of our agenda. Any concerns? Can we do that? Seeing no hands up, if we can move to section 6 of the agenda, the Executive Director's Report.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to add to the written report.
Are there any questions for the Executive Director? Nope, seeing no questions. The next section on the agenda is the representative updates. Are there any updates from the various representatives to, there's a number of the Alberta Association of Police Governance, Commissioner Zhang, is anything there you would add?
Nothing additional to add, thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right. And with that, are there any other questions or comments that the commissioners would like to make before we move into the public participation part of the agenda? All right, okay. So that's the end of the presentations and our formal agenda today. We're ready to invite public guests to make comments. Those who have registered are in the queue to speak. One of our staff will invite you to unmute yourself one at a time. Quick reminder that we planned on about 3 minutes for each of you to speak, and you can direct your comments to myself. And one final comment as a reminder, we will accept your comments as information and unfortunately can't provide a response under our current process. As I commented at the beginning of the meeting, we know this falls short of what people expect, and we're working to improve the public participation process for as early as possible in 2022 so that we can allow for more meaningful dialogue with community members, which is our intent. Anyone who would like to discuss a complaint against an officer should contact our public complaint director or PSS, as we cannot address individual cases. And a final reminder to our media partners, we'll hear from our citizens first, and then we'll end the public meeting before moving into the media scrum. So with that, we're ready to put through the first speaker.
Thank you, Chair. We have 3 public participants registered for today. The first speaker is Edgar Ayala. Edgar, I will cue you to unmute and you can go ahead when you're ready. I'm not seeing that Edgar's unmuting. Okay, we'll move on to our second speaker and try to connect with him in the background. Our second registered speaker is Margaret McQuiston. Go ahead, please, Margaret.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon and congratulations to Chair Cornett and Commissioner Walcott on your new roles. Thank you for this opportunity to update the Commission and our work to improve the relationship between Calgary's Indigenous community and the Calgary Police Service. As you know, my name is Margaret McQuiston and I'm a member of the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good. And I sit on the Truth and Reconciliation Research Action Team. The Calgary Alliance for the Common Good is a nonpartisan and nonprofit alliance of congregations, unions, schools, and community groups representing more than 37,000 Calgarians. Since our last presentation to the Commission at your October meeting, we have had 2 meetings with the CPS. At our November 16th meeting, the CPS outlined to us the rebranding initiatives they are proposing to improve the policing of Calgary's Indigenous community. As Deputy Chief McClellan has already outlined to you, these include a CPS Indigenous Member Circle, an Elders Consultation Circle, an Indigenous Relations Office, which they explained to us would be independent of the other diversity initiatives. And this is where the Indigenous liaison officers would be housed. And finally, the exchange program with officers employed with various Treaty 7 tribal police forces. So we are very supportive of these initiatives, as together they would help build the relationship between the Indigenous community in Calgary and the CPS, which is what we have been advocating for some time now. We commend the CPS for taking these initiatives. To us, they indicate that the CPS is willing to move in a direction that will lead to more positive outcomes. Also at that meeting, CPS told us that if their proposed budget was approved by City Council, they would proceed to hire an Indigenous liaison officer for each of their 8 districts by spring of 2022. We then had a follow-up meeting with the CPS on November 19th, where they answered some of our questions, and we agreed to meet again early in the new year when the outcome of the City Council budget meetings would be known, and the CPS had time to work out next steps, depending on that outcome. In response, the Alliance committed to supporting the CPS budget request, since the hiring of the Indigenous liaison officers was linked to its approval. So to get that support, we reached out to our membership and asked that they encourage their councillors to support the CPS budget. And as we all know, City Council approved the CPS budget last week, so now the work can begin. When we meet with the CPS in January, we will be shifting our work to keeping the CPS accountable for the commitments they have made. To help us do that, we will request a timeline for implementation of these initiatives that were discussed previously, and the process that they will use to hire the Indigenous liaison officers by spring 2022. We will also be paying attention to the organizational structure for the new Indigenous Relations Officer to ensure that it is independent, staffed with senior Indigenous officers, and given the profile and resources that are needed for it to be effective. We would expect that it is consistent with Call to Justice number 9.4 of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit, and that it is in line with the thinking of Harold Johnson as outlined in his book, Peace and Good Order, The Case for Indigenous Justice in Canada. So thank you for your time today, and I wish you all the best for a happy holiday season and hopefully a better new year than the last 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Much appreciated. Thank you.
I will try to invite Edgar Ayala to speak again. He looks like he's muted but queued up to speak. Go ahead, Edgar. Looks like we're still having difficulties, so I'm going to move on to our 3rd registered speaker, Eddie Sue. Eddie, if you to unmute, you can go ahead when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Congratulations to Chair Cornett, and thank you for your time. So today I'm going to have actually 2 top talking points. So one is calling for the attention for Asian being the victim of the systematic racism. And actually, I really appreciate and admire Margaret have been on the public engagement part for many consecutive times. And also thanks for the Blacks and Indigenous for their continuous call for the focus on the systematic racism. And also, I'm really appreciate and glad that the Calgary Police actually also face up this problem. So that's why we actually, from the Asian community, actually to support the increasing for the funding for the police. But unlike the Black and the Indigenous, Asian had not been very main target for the systematic topic for the systematic racism, probably since we are not actually being the victim for some very severe or major incidents that probably involving like physical injury or even life threatening. So we are more of kind of the victim of relatively minor issues like unlawful and unright issue of traffic tickets, or being the victim of inaction of being reported property or identity threat related crimes. But on the other hand, is although we it's not, but I think Asians should also be about knowing about this, and that's because the number is actually more than frequent than we previously expected. So probably in the future, I will learn from Margaret and probably continue to bring the cases from the Asian community to call for the attention. Secondly, I think the more important point is I want to provide a supplemented insight into from a different perspective for pinpointing some insight for the tackling the systematic racism in the Calgary Police Service. I appreciate that a lot of effort and resources, investments have been deployed to investigate like what is the sources and what could be done to improve it. But from my perspective, I'd like to introduce two points for supplemented insight. So number one is we've actually finding a certain portion of police officer actually doesn't seem to be fully respect the procedural integrity of the enforcement process. And the second point is certain police officers' understanding of the basic or fundamental value is very different from what the general public could understand. So, for example, like some police officer, when they are dealing with the complaints of their subordinates, their understanding of the concept or definition of deceit is very different from the public. And then for the first point, actually, as we are proud of, we are a rule of law society, and the public power are placed under very strict procedure limitation that ensure the enforcement is rule of law rather than rule of man. But in the actual operation of the enforcement by the police officer, there's a very certain proportion of police officer doesn't actually fully respect that the procedural integrity and actually doing the procedures pretty arbitrarily. Of course, that can be evident by some investigation, but since the rule of the public engagement, I cannot talk in detail, but I just want to raise it and call for some attention. Maybe that will help to provide a supplemented perspective to understanding and also figure out effective solution to tackle the systematic racism. After all, that would be the wish of all the Calgarians from all sorts of race and nations. So that would be great. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and your reflective and very thoughtful comments there. Very much appreciate your joining us today. So thank you. Heather, are there any other people?
I'll just go back one last time to Edgar and offer him a final opportunity to unmute and participate. Go ahead, Edgar. I'm not seeing his releasing the mute button, so I believe our public participation session is complete.
Thank you. So thank you for everyone for joining us today and for the comments that you've provided. At this point, the chief and I will stay on to take questions from the media. Commissioners, CPS, and public callers can leave the meeting now. And commissioners and CPS, those who need to be there, will sign back on for the in-camera portion of the meeting in about 15 minutes. There's a separate link in the calendar invite for that. So I will ask Corwin if he could please queue up the reporters now.
You bet. Thank you very much, Chair. So we have several reporters on the line today. We had 5 who've registered, so I will go through the 5 who've registered, and then after that we'll open it up for any other media who are on the line who perhaps didn't get in quite in time. So we will start with Madeline Smith. Go ahead, Madeline, when you're ready. Oh, sorry, I will cue you up here to speak. There we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep, go ahead.
So my first question is a bit off topic, probably just for Chair Cornett. The Police Commission announced, I believe in October, that there would be a review of the internal disciplinary process for former Constable Sean Chu from back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Just wondering if there's any update on the progress on this review and if there's a timeline that you anticipate for finishing that work.
Yes, the commission, our public complaints director, is bringing forward a proposal later tonight. And I believe that proposal is to take place, or her timeline is somewhere in the order of 3 or 4 months, looking at processes. So we haven't actually heard what the proposal is yet, but we will later tonight.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on for Chief Neufeld. So I just want to make sure I understand what's going on with the SRO review correctly. So you had said in September of 2020, one of the commitments that you made to council was an independent review of the SRO program. And, you know, that's now been done, but it seems like there are some issues with the sort of engagement results that you got. And I mean, just looking through the demographics in this report, it looks like, you know, well over half of the respondents were either parents or school staff. And then I think more than a third identified as white. So do you think that you've been able to fulfill the commitment of having an independent review now that, you know, that we've seen the results of it and there's some areas where it's been lacking?
Hi, Madeline. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think to your first question, I think, yes, we've been able to fulfill the commitment of doing the review. I think what we found, though, is that particularly during the waves of COVID there, the engagement portion of it was challenging, as you know, one would anticipate. So I think when looking at the results of the engagement and who was represented in the engagement, it sort of indicated the need to go deeper and to go, you know, extend the design phase, as has been discussed at the meeting here, to basically go and ensure that we're getting the voices of students, and not just students, but also in particular, making sure we're hearing from Black and Indigenous students about their experiences with the program. So I think that's got to be the next step, and has been pointed out, and that's what we'll undertake moving forward. Thank you.
Can I just quickly follow up, and then maybe you want to move on to someone else?
Absolutely.
I just, that the process, the next design phase, like CPS is involved in that, correct? So is that, do you still consider that sort of an independent part of moving forward and gathering that feedback, or will there be some fairly significant CPS involvement in that?
Well, I think the main aspects of the CPS involvement has been decision-making in terms of how to move forward based on the report we received from the review, and then focusing on the fact that we didn't think that the consultation piece was sufficient to move forward. So, but I think Jason outlined there that going forward in terms of some of that further work, we're looking at making sure that there's independent facilitators and also partnering with community as we did the first time. But hopefully the timing of it, given where we are in the pandemic, will be more conducive to being able to get to those communities.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Excellent. Thank you, Madeline. And the next who registered was your colleague, Brittany Gervais. I will allow you to talk now, Brittany.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. So this isn't directed to anyone specifically, but I'd like to go back to the role of SROs with reporting cases of sexual violence in schools. So I was told by high school students that their SRO was sometimes absent for weeks at a time. So there wouldn't actually be an SRO officer on campus. It sounded like it was pretty infrequent. So I wanted to know how often SROs are expected to be present on school grounds, like within the course of a week or a month, just to get an idea, and then what discussions are going on to ensure students have access to an SRO at all times.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. That's a great question. So I think one of the challenges that you see here is the expansion of the program over time within the system. And I think it was probably alluded to earlier that there's a finite number of officers for a large number of schools. So consequently, that can certainly be an issue. I would think that school resource officers or students that want to get a hold of school resource officers would be able to do that, obviously through our partners in the schools. But if they, obviously we would want to be as present as possible. And I think as we go forward, that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at in terms of success measures is how many students in schools can a single resource officer be able to interact with. So Ralph Beckenstead did come back in the room here, and he's probably in a better position to speak to sort of, you probably didn't hear the question, Ralph, but
just part of it from the superintendent, sir. If somebody could just catch me up to speed, that'd be great.
Sure. I think Brittany was just asking about in talking to some of the students around sexual violence in schools. They talked about the fact that they weren't always able to access a school resource officer because sometimes they're away for longer periods of time and they don't have access to them. So she was just talking about how often SROs are expected to be in schools or how often they're not there, if you could comment on that.
But Chief, so that's a tough question, Brittany. So based on their schedule, they should be in several days throughout the week. Based on the different levels of SROs between elementary and senior high, depends on how many schools are assigned. So predominantly when we're talking about sexual assaults or crimes of violence towards high school students, the SROs have a 2 to 3 school ratio. And we're very fortunate right now, even though with the 23 member staffing out of our allotted amount, the senior high SROs are quite often in their schools 2 times a week, but they're always available. I talked a little bit earlier to commission about that partnership and how important it is with the school boards and the school administration. When working, they're always available by phone, they're always diverted. And although they're not in the school, they could be within the community at the local 7-Eleven, working at the behest of being an SRO in the schools, but always available. So it's that relationship piece. So that's how they're able to get a hold of the SRO at their assigned school.
Okay. Okay, I just have a follow-up to if that's okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm it sounds like from what I'm hearing, and please correct me if I've understood it wrong, but because of staffing challenges, sometimes an SRO could be called out to a different school, but the expectation is they should be there several days through the week. Are there any discussions happening as to how to increase staffing levels of SROs to ensure that students have like kind of in-person access, or any efforts just regarding increasing that staffing level?
At this point, I would say no. While we're looking at the review of the program, we weren't looking at expansion of the program. We have received actually some requests from separate school boards and others to look at increasing SROs. But at this point, until we finish the review, we wouldn't be looking at doing that.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Brittany. Adam Toy, you are next up, so I will allow you to unmute here.
Thanks so much. Just want to check you can hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Wonderful. First question from our newsroom. Chief, just wondering if we can get your thoughts on the numbers of the vaccine uptake of CPS members.
Sorry, Adam, did I understand you correctly? Just my thoughts on the uptake?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm, you know, obviously we support vaccination and we would like to see all our members get vaccinated. We realize that some people are hesitant to do so for reasons that are their own. I think at this point we're at I think we heard 92% fully vaccinated. And of course, I think that's higher than, I think the number I heard today, the current number in the community was about 88. So we're probably 4 or 5% higher than the community. And I mean, let's face it, I think people are having a lot of pressure put on them based on, you know, all aspects of their lives in terms of anything from being able to go out to dinner, to go to a Flames game, to, you know, attend children's sports and that sort of thing. So I think there's quite a bit of pressure. But, you know, there is a number of people who I've spoken to who have, you know, believe very strongly that they don't want to get vaccinated and they're willing to give up some of those things and privileges to be able to do that. So in the meantime, we are offering that rapid testing option to make sure that the officers we send out into the community, into folks' homes, are not infected with COVID-19 to the best that we can ensure that. So that's where we sit now. And as I say, Adam, we're a little higher, I think, than the general community.
Great, thanks. As a different topic, with this SRO matter, if the re-engagement with your stakeholders, larger members of the student body, come back and there's an overwhelming sentiment to get rid of the SRO program, are you attached to it as the police chief to keep that in place?
Well, we're attached to the extent that we know that our members have done excellent work in the schools and they've made a huge difference in the lives of students. And so we want to celebrate the successes and we want to build off of those. But let's face it, we have to be open-minded in the consultation process and the second piece of the design phase. And we have to be open to what we hear. I think we heard from the commission tonight, you know, a desire to make sure that we are open-minded and looking at the issue or the ultimate goal of positive engagement for all young people. And so we'll look at the best ways to do that. And that's what we'll come back with for sure.
Okay, and then the last question I have, just an administrative matter for myself. The staff sergeant who was speaking to the SRO items, I believe Ralph was his first name. Wonder if we can get his last name and if he could spell it for us as well.
You'll have to do that because I'm not sure.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, Adam. It's Veckenstead, V-E-C-K-E-N, S as in Sam, T-E.
And he'd like to buy a vowel.
Great, thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Adam. So our next speaker who's registered is Nancy at CBC. So Nancy, I don't know if you're on the line or if there's someone else from CTV or from CBC, but I'll unmute you now. Anyone from CBC? Okay, so hearing no questions from CBC. City, I see you're also on the line. I'll give you a chance to ask a question if you have it. You can unmute now. Okay, and then finally CTV, Josh Richardson. I'll unmute if you have a question. Okay, none. That brings us to the end of Media Scrum. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all those from the service for joining us for the first part of the meetings. I didn't look at my watch closely enough. I think we're to reconvene at 5:20, which gives us 4 minutes to move on to the next Zoom call. So we'll see you as we move over. So thank you again for everybody's participation.